Wonderful, thank you. Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here talking about drones. I'm Gretchen West. I'm a senior advisor at Hogan Lovell's law firm. I'm also co-executive director of the Commercial Drone Alliance, which is an industry nonprofit that's really meant to help commercial end users, big companies, understand the value of drones. So we're going to talk today a bit about the realities and the challenges of integrating commercial drones into the workplace, into a variety of different industries. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the timing of that. So before we get started, it's a little bit hard for us to see with the lights, but I wanted to just get a poll of the audience. How many of you are actually flying drones commercially now? Okay. Doesn't look like too many. How many of you are interested in setting up a business flying commercial drones? Okay, good. Good, some more. How many of you actually have your remote pilot's certificate? You've taken the test. Okay, a couple. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. We have about 45 minutes, and we'll leave some time for questions at the end. But I'm going to introduce the panel. They're just going to give a quick minute and a half on their background, and then we're going to cover some key topic areas and have a little bit of a dialogue, and then we'll entertain some questions at the end. But I'll start first with Sasha Rao, who's with Maynard Cooper.
Hi, yes, I'm Sasha Rao. I'm a partner at Maynard Cooper and Gale in San Francisco. I started as an intellectual property lawyer, and that's what I primarily do. But because of my interest in technology, I've gotten a lot of interest in drones, and I happen to be representing a client in the drone space.
Next we have Joanna Simon from Morrison Foerster.
I'm Joanna Simon. I'm an attorney at Morrison Foerster. I do all kinds of work for clients in the aviation aerospace industry, ranging from what you think of as traditional aerospace, meaning like product liability work for an avionics manufacturer, for example, airlines, airports, and then over the past 4 years or so, I've kind of developed a subspecialty in unmanned aircraft systems. So I do a lot of regulatory work for clients, ranging from a small business who might want to use a drone to inspect a wind turbine, for example, all the way up to a client like Facebook on their high-altitude, solar-powered Aquila plane. So really, our clients run the gamut, and the work we do for them also varies greatly. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
And finally, Stephen Flynn with Skytango.
Yeah, hi. My name is Stephen Flynn. I'm an American living in Dublin now. I'm here because I was, by happen chance, one of the world's first licensed civilian drone pilots. Ireland was one of the first countries to enable that program, and I started flying drones commercially in 2012. Learned some really valuable lessons around the pain points between what you have to do as a drone pilot and deal with your customers and also the landowners that you fly over. And as part of that process, we started building some software that answers a lot of the questions and helps empower pilots to say no when they need to. And we can talk about that later.
Great. So drone technology has really been around probably about 50 years or more, and it was really used by the military. And it's only been in the last probably 5 to 10 years that we've seen this real shift into commercial use of drones. You know, the drones are getting smaller, they're more powerful, they've got stronger technology, and there's so many different industries that could use these drones for good benefits. You know, delivery, obviously there's consumer delivery, but there's also humanitarian delivery, delivering medicine and blood to places that are remote, or for search and rescue after a disaster, or you know, inspecting buildings or cell towers, things that are very dangerous to do. So there's a lot of different benefits of using drones, and I think every day we hear of a new industry that's interested in using this technology. However, there are a lot of challenges from the regulatory environment to privacy to public perception, and it's hurting our industry as far as the growth that we would like to see. So I'm going to turn it over to Joanna, and she's going to talk about the regulatory environment, kind of where we were and where we are now, and then also kind of give a highlight on what's next, what's coming next for the drone industry from a regulatory perspective.
Thanks, Gretchen. I just wanted to start out by saying I really liked the name of this panel, How Soon Can We Fly? Because to me it just makes me ask a bunch more questions. What are you trying to fly? Where are you trying to fly it? Who's doing the flying? Are you flying one? Are you flying a fleet? So all of those considerations will go into the answer to that question. And I think in order to think about where we are now, we look back about 10 years, where we started from a regulatory standpoint. In 2007, we had the FAA issue a rule that said you cannot fly in the airspace without specific permission from the FAA. That was the 2007 drone policy. After that, you go about 5 years forward to 2012. You have the FAA Modernization Act of 2012, in which Congress mandated or basically tasked the FAA with developing regulations to integrate unmanned systems into the airspace. The FAA was running behind their mandate from Congress, but just last year, in summer of 2016, we finally got the small drone rule, which is just the sort of first incremental step for integrating small unmanned systems into the United States airspace. It's called Part 107. And Part 107 is made up of several, what I like to call different buckets. You have kind of a registration bucket where you're going to have registration requirements. You have an operator bucket where there's going to be different requirements for each operator. And then you have operational parameters. Where can you fly your drone? How fast can you fly it? Each of those buckets have all kinds of little sub-buckets, but those are kind of the overarching considerations that you're going to look at right now. One of the best parts of 107 from an industry perspective was that it really loosened the requirement as far as needing a pilot's license in order to operate a drone. So it created an entirely new, what we call class of airmen, which would be remotely piloted or remote aircraft pilots. And those standards to become certificated as a remote pilot are significantly easier to meet than those for a manned aircraft, which is basically what you had to be meeting prior to this Part 107. You had to have an actual pilot's license. So that was really something the FAA did to help enable the drone industry. Another thing that they did is they removed some of the bureaucratic barriers in order to fly, whereas before you had to, like I said, apply for specific permission from the FAA. Now, as long as you stay within the operational parameters that they lay out, you can go ahead and conduct your operation. Some of those parameters, they're pretty basic. It's like 100 miles per hour, under 400 feet, not over people, in the daytime. Those are your basic set of rules. And then you do have one other part of Part 107 that was really excited the industry was the waiver provision, meaning that if you couldn't meet any of those normal operational parameters, or you wanted to go beyond them, meaning you wanted to fly above 400 feet, or you wanted to fly at night, or you wanted to fly beyond the visual line of sight of the operator, you could apply for a waiver from those. Practically speaking, we are seeing the FAA grant some of those waivers, and Gretchen can speak a little bit more to that, but for the most part, it's a long process to get a waiver, and you're only going to get a waiver for some of the very basic limitations, like the daytime, the limitation on flights during daytime. That you'll get waived if you can prove a safety case. Some of the other provisions are going to be much more difficult to get waived, like the line of sight requirement. We were just talking about how truly the first waiver for beyond visual line of sight came down last week, and it was for a drone that weighs as much as about 4 sheets of paper. So if you're flying a unit that weighs more than that or has a complicated payload, it's going to be very difficult for you to get a waiver to go beyond your visual line of sight. Anything else for you?
I think that's good
All right.
for now. So Stephen, being kind of connected to the end user operator environment, being familiar with the US, but also being based in Ireland, what are you seeing? How does this kind of regulatory environment affect what you're trying to do with your company?
Well, the thing about the regulations is that they're really important, both from the rules side and also from the enforcement side. And so what you're seeing, and I use Ireland as the case for you because it's about 2.5 years in terms of maturity in terms of commercially and sort of what's happening to the pilots and what's happening to the customers. And what's really interesting is I think it was about a year ago, the Irish Aviation Authority decided to make it legal in certain cases to be unlicensed and uninsured and still do commercial work in certain areas. They went to a completely risk-based model after a slew of pilots, including myself, had gone through the training and the licensing and insurance and the rest. And so you kind of have two classes almost of operators there. And it's a little bit problematic because what's happening now is because enforcement is so difficult, the licensed pilots are kind of looking out because it's an unsure space, and they're wondering, well, when my license comes for renewal, maybe I just won't bother. Because if I'm looking at a business case and I think, well, it's better for my business if I don't spend the money. But from a risk-based, if you have an accident or you do something in being employed by a customer, you're putting them at risk too. So the regulation and the enforcement really go hand in hand. And so in that way, it's really interesting to sort of see how that plays out in a bigger environment, like here in the United States. We've got a much larger system with a lot more moving parts. And so what we've done is we're really interested in helping the drone operators by putting the onus on the buyer as well, because what we're starting to see work through the systems in Europe is that they're starting to look at ways at holding the buyers accountable. So if somebody is broadcasting material or putting it on a billboard or putting it in a magazine, that's one of the ways that you can help, encourage safe operations and legal operations, because it's very hard to fix that on the source side. Because I always like to say, every year there's a new 14-year-old that gets a drone for their birthday that is ready to run out down the road and do a job for you for $100. And that's really fundamentally corrosive to the industry. So getting the regulations figured out and clear is really, really important.
So as Joanna mentioned, this, Part 107, or the small rule, basically broadly authorizes commercial drone use, basically up to 55, the vehicle can be up to 55 pounds. And so we are seeing commercial operations of drones today with some limitations as she described. But the future, this more kind of widespread use, and I'll ask again in a little bit, when are we going to see this broader commercial use of these smaller drones? But I want to turn it over to Sasha to talk a little bit about what's even next past commercial drones. What are the next big things that are going to be up in the air that we need to be paying attention to?
That's right. So we heard, if you were at the panels this morning about autonomous vehicles, we heard a lot about self-driving cars. And some of the panelists there seemed skeptical about self-piloted aircraft. And so one of the things we're seeing is in the legal area, the development of lots of companies with an interest in building flying cars. So these are electric vertical takeoff and landing, small aircraft that have the ability to carry passengers. This isn't as far off as you might think, because one of my clients, A-Cube by Airbus Group, is building a vehicle that's going to be flying before the end of this year, a prototype. And it's called Vahana, and if you want to see what the vehicle looks like, you might want to check out vahana.aero. So what are the implications of a vehicle like this? So as we heard from Joanna, Part 107 is about small UAVs. So anything larger than 55 pounds under current FAA regulations is governed just like any other aircraft. So it needs to be type certificated before it can fly. And also, we heard from the folks at NASA that you also need an air traffic system that will allow for the integration of small and large drones into the airspace. So the FAA has made a lot of progress. NASA has made a lot of progress in this area. In particular, in December of last year, the FAA issued new regulations called Part 23 that basically provide a regulatory pathway for the approval of electric VTOL aircraft. So this is a very significant development, and the FAA has provided performance-based criteria that can be met by a manufacturer to get these vehicles certificated. And that's an important first step in getting these things in the air. And we heard from NASA that there have been a lot of tests already in how to have an automated air traffic management system for drones, and there is no good reason why that system cannot work to accommodate larger aircraft. The biggest contributor or benefit of large passenger carrying UAVs is that they will be equipped with sense and avoid systems. So the dangers that we may be talking about in the small drone context, where there's a risk of collision with other drones or birds and other objects in the sky, if a vehicle has a good sense and avoid system, it should be able to avoid collisions with these objects and be a safer vehicle in some ways than the smaller drones.
So we talk about the challenges that the commercial drone industry faces. You know, we don't want this to be negative because we know that this industry is going to grow. We know that there are too many benefits that these drones are going to provide all these different industries. But in a lot of ways, we've had, when working with the government on a lot of these issues, we've had, you know, one step forward, two steps back. So we had Part 107, the small rule, which broadly authorized commercial applications. The FAA was going to start working on some rulemaking to be able to fly over people, to be able to fly beyond visual line of sight. And then several things happened all at once where, first of all, President Trump had his regulations freeze. And a lot of industries don't want to be overly regulated, but for our industry, we actually need those rules to be able to understand how to operate. And so that actually really hurt our industry. Another thing was there's been a lot of talk about security concerns. And I want to see, Joanna, if you could talk a little bit about, you know, where we are right now in the industry based on some of these security concerns and where you see that going.
Sure. Security concerns are a really interesting topic because, of course, they are very, very real. But it is not that often that you see someone who's going to take all the steps that they need to take under regulations, register my drone, get my remote pilot's license, every other step that they need to take, and then go and complete a terrorist act with that drone. You could buy, a drone off the shelf and fly it right now without doing any of those things, and we see that all the time in hobby use. There's not very many requirements to hobbyist drones. So some of the security concerns, while they are real, it's kind of I think a false dichotomy to say that that might not happen if we regulate drones more heavily. And then with regard to the larger drones, one thing I wanted to hop on, something that Sasha said, was about we are dealing right now, aside from Part 23, with a very serious legacy regulation system that is made for manned aircraft. So if you are trying to certificate a drone that's over 55 pounds, you are going to have a very hard time trying to find a path to certification for that. Part 23 was a welcome addition to the regulatory framework. but it doesn't apply to everyone, and that's kind of another barrier that you're going to see. I think you might have had something you wanted to say about.
Oh yeah, no, I was actually going to add to that because what always surprises me is that the rules are all about staying within line of sight, and yet you can go and buy a Mavic Pro, and it'll fly up to 6 kilometers, like 5, 6, 7 miles, and still give you a video feed. There's somebody in Dublin who's constantly posting footage that he's shooting around the city from his balcony in the middle of town, and so he's flying out 4 or 5 miles in the middle of the night and then putting this stuff up on YouTube. So there's nothing stopping people from flying the drones. I just wanted to add that it's fascinating.
I'd like to add, the only reason we're talking about line of sight for small drones is because most of them don't have sense and avoid systems. So they are not built to detect a manned aircraft and avoid it, because the biggest nightmare for the FAA is to think of a little tiny drone which needs to get out of the way of manned aircraft, hitting a manned aircraft and causing massive loss of life. So that is why the FAA is concerned, and I think those concerns are valid because we all want a safe airspace. We want these vehicles to be safe. So I think that it's up to the technologists to develop sense and avoid systems that can be used not just for large vehicles. We see them in Tesla cars, we see them in Google's Waymo cars. We need those, and we have them for Vahanas, but we need them for the small drones.
So I want to pull that thread a little bit, and to be able to enable this great technology, to be able to enable drones, what are the other technologies that we need to see developed to convince the FAA that these are safe? Besides sense and avoid, what else do we need to see?
So I think the technology is already there, is already developed. I think the question is it hasn't been employed in commercial vehicles yet because of the cost of it. And so what we need to see is a natural decline in prices of sensors and optical sensors, radars, LiDARs, that sort of thing. And that will naturally lead to its adoption in these vehicles to make them safer. Other technologies, better lithium-ion batteries that are smaller, lighter, last longer, so we can have longer flying times. Other technologies, better airframes to make them lighter so you can, and more durable so the plane can last in the air longer. Better rotors, better airframes, better wings, and we are seeing a wide range of designs out there. If you go Google Terrafugia, Joby, Lilium, all these other Z-Aero, Kitty Hawk, they have interesting designs out there and interesting ways to solve the technological problem we're talking about.
Can I add one thing to that? I think for me, I had an interesting meeting with the IAA about 3 or 4 months ago, and we presented our software stack and told them the vision of the company. And the thing that they were excited about was that we were doing the one thing that really they felt hadn't been done yet, which was kind of trying to win the hearts and minds of the communities. Because what he said was, and I think this is really true, the technology has moved so well and so fast that you can pretty much do what you want to do. You can fly as far, as high, or as long as you engineer it and you build it, and it's amazing. But across the board, in my take is that a lot of technology could be built into helping communities be more comfortable with the operations, so that the regulations and the fear factor kind of tamps down a little bit, and that goes towards like data privacy and answering issues around how this data that's being acquired over communities is being used, and also, like you said, flying cars and noise and the issues. And if the technology that isn't even necessarily all about drones can be expanded to help communities embrace this, that will help the regulation and kind of move things forward.
So you're just getting kind of a sneak peek at some of the challenges that the industry faces, and we could probably sit up here for another 2 or 3 hours and go into a lot more detail about everything else. But again, this is, there's tremendous benefit to this technology, and for each of you, I just want to ask, I want to switch over to some of the fun stuff with this industry. What are some of the really cool applications that you've seen? What what are industries doing and how are they using drones? What are some of the cool, fun things that you're seeing?
Okay, I'll start. I think the thing that catches my eye the most is the swarm technology. Rather than having one big drone that lifts a huge package, it's the miniaturization of all those sensors and getting smaller. I just ran into somebody at the first night at the launch party that's using swarms to inspect locomotives while they're moving and reporting that back, and I think that's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I agree that swarm technology is really fascinating. A lot of people think of drones as a platform for cameras or for LiDAR, and I would encourage everyone to think kind of beyond that. You can also use drones for things like provision of internet services. I mean, that's incredible. That's an incredible technology to be able to deploy in emergency situations or to under and unconnected parts of the world. I think that's really exciting. I think the work that Sasha's doing with flying cars is incredible too.
So I think that, I'd like to step back. What we are in the middle of when we're talking about drones is we are in the middle of the automation transformation across every industry. Everything is getting more automated. So a flying car is simply a self-piloted vertical takeoff and landing electric aircraft that is just a logical extension of a self-driving electric vehicle, which is terrestrial. There is tremendous benefit to society from allowing broader reach to these things. These are not meant to be luxury items. These are designed to ease your commute. We spend hours stuck in traffic in every major metropolitan area in this world. If you're in Mumbai or Bangalore, it is worse than in the Bay Area. And imagine if we could all avail ourselves of a new mode of public transportation. And in some ways, I would argue that an electric flying car is safer than an electric terrestrial vehicle because there aren't children playing in the sky. There aren't as many unexpected obstacles in the sky as they would be on a city road.
So I do want to leave some time for questions. So one of my favorite, and I mentioned this in the beginning, is just all the humanitarian aid and humanitarian delivery that can be done. And the keynote that follows us is from Zipline, and they're probably going to talk a lot about that. But last question for the panel before we take questions from the audience. When? And I know nobody can accurately predict when we're going to see commercial drones, the smaller aircraft to flying taxis, but just in your experience, how long do you think it's actually going to take? And what do we need to do as an industry to get there? Whoever wants to go first.
Okay, start at the end of the row. Sooner than you think. When I threw all of my money into a heavy lift drone in 2012, I thought I'd get 3-4 years out of it, and I was shocked at how quickly it got replaced. It was 10, 11 months, and the stuff that was half the price did twice as many things. And I think that trend is still continuing. And I think that if you think it's a long way off, whatever it is you're imagining, I'd say half the time.
I agree. I think that we'll start seeing certain technologies. The technologies are ready to go, but we'll probably see them betaed in various test cities sooner than you might imagine. But wide-scale deployment of those technologies is really going to have to be enabled, sad to say, by regulation. And so if we can get the government moving in the right direction along with industry, it'd probably be relatively soon. But that might be a roadblock or a skyblock to really seeing quick deployment of technology on a wide scale?
As I mentioned at the beginning, Vahana is going to fly its prototype before the end of this year. And so in terms of wide-scale deployment, we believe it is the industry's responsibility to work together with the public agencies and the regulators to make everyone feel comfortable that the vehicles are safe and they're appropriate for wide-scale public deployment. And I think it needs to happen in a staged approach because we can't directly go and start flying these things between San Jose and San Francisco. I think they'll need to be working together in partnership with the regulators, demonstrating it maybe in sparsely populated areas, and then gradually moving it into more populated areas after building the safety case.
So apologies to the audience, but we're not going to be able to answer the question up on the screen of how soon we can fly, because there really isn't an answer, and it's very difficult to predict. But I think, as everybody has said here, it's going to happen sooner than we all think. The federal government is slowing it down just because of a lot of reasons, and you know, creating regulations, it takes hard, and it's an archaic system that we're trying to adapt to a brand new technology. And so there are a lot of industry groups that are working on this that have been set up by the FAA and other government agencies. There's a lot of stakeholders in the community coming together, and the FAA and other agencies are really interested in working with different companies that are developing technologies that would be useful to solve a lot of these problems. So I encourage you all to get engaged in a lot of those activities. But let me see if does anybody in the audience have any questions for our panelists? We have one right here. I think there's a microphone coming your way. If you don't mind stating your name and affiliation, please.
My name is Puneet. I work for Google. So my question is means we are talking about the flying car and drones, of course. So if suppose in future, let's suppose this is very common, means everybody will have the sky car or something, then how we will handle the traffic congestion in air?
How will we handle the traffic in the airspace?
Traffic congestion in the air, because eventually it will come.
So I don't know if you were here for the NASA talk, but basically folks are already working, including industry, on air traffic management of vehicles, including drones. And what we envision is an automated system where there, you know, of course, right now when we're talking about manned aircraft, there's about 55,000 flights a day. And what NASA is projecting is millions of drone flights in a few years. When I'm talking about flights, I'm talking about small drones mainly. So when we build a solution that has an automated way and it's distributed and decentralized, it's going to work.
And that's probably only a few years off.
Yeah.
NASA's been working on that for several years. Any other questions from the audience?
Soren Sarkar from Nextval. My question is, in the auto industry, you see the Ubers and the Lyfts, which is the manned transportation that precedes the completely automated car, right? Do you see anything like that happening in the drone industry? Wouldn't that be easier to just have manned on-demand flights, vertical takeoff landing, and then go to full automation?
Well, Uber actually is looking to do that, and others. There's this idea of air taxis. I mean, that it's likely going to be an on-demand service. Uber is actively creating an ecosystem of manufacturers, companies that are working on noise reduction, increased battery, and other technologies to enable that to happen. I think we had a question in the front. Oh, sorry. We have a question in the front next after this.
Sure. Hi, Mohinder Sika, Sensitel. I don't know if you covered delivery. That was one big driver. Is there still the driver? And do you think Amazon will be first to get there, or you have other insights?
So your question is about delivery and whether or not there's going to be a driver?
I mean, driver for the drone industry. So
Driver for the drone. Joanna, you want to take that one?
Sure. So as far as package delivery goes, your question is that going to be a driver of the drone industry? It's going to be definitely one use case for drones, and it might be a big one at some point. Again, it's going to have to be tested and deployed in rural areas, probably first, beta in a rural area, tested out in a city. But there are so many other uses of the technology other than package delivery that we might not even think about on a day-to-day basis when it comes to infrastructure and construction on the civil side, also agriculture. So I don't think that drone delivery is going to overtake the drone market. I think it will be just one piece of it.
I was just going to add to that. I think the winning over the community is a big part of that vertical, because out in the country it's not an issue. But if you're in a really densely populated neighborhood and drones are landing left and right, I know for a fact in Dublin it wouldn't last long because the kids would bring it out of the sky. I mean, it would be like a sport, to try and take the delivery drone down. So, there's that community engagement part that's really important.
And drone delivery originally, when Amazon came out with it, it was package delivery from fulfillment centers around, and you'd have your package within 30 minutes. Now, because of the regulatory environment, it's going to be very, very difficult to do. You can't request a waiver from the FAA to carry a package beyond visual line of sight. So new companies now are looking at new models of delivery, where you drive a car into a centrally located area, and the drones come off the car, and so it's more contained. It's a more contained environment. And again, Zipline's going to be on after us, and they're going to talk about some of their humanitarian delivery, which is a little bit different. I think we had one more question here, and then I think we're going to be out of time.
Hear me?
I think we can now.
Oh, okay. So I'm a lawyer from India. We specialize also, one of the specialized in drones. There are some restrictions on that, but my question was more on the other side. When exactly you said it would be in the marketplace, drones, and how much do you think it will cost in the initial phase?
Well, they're in the marketplace now. You can buy drones very.
No, drones are available. I'm talking the air taxi, passenger. Passenger. I'm more keen on that because I want to fly.
Okay. So I don't think I can answer that question now, but the idea is to have something that is commercial and at a price point that is accessible to most people. Right?
Yeah,
So-
Uber has put together a white paper on their Uber Elevate program, and they've also announced it publicly. They do have some pricing, and they were looking at San Jose to San Francisco, and I don't recall the exact number, but it was $100, $150, something like that.
On the Vahana.aero site, there may be some information about that.
Okay.
I don't want to misspeak, but there are numbers out there. It's going to be more expensive than a taxi,
Obviously.
but less expensive than a helicopter ride.
All right. Okay.
And as far, I wanted to circle back a little bit to your when question. There are so many factors that go into that, not just can we do it, will the FAA allow it? Also, you have to think about like local zoning laws. Where are these things going to land? Where are they going to take off from? Is it going to be from the equivalent of a parking lot or the top of a building? And how do we make those decisions?
All right, well, thank you all for being here,
Thank
and I'd
you.
like to thank the panelists, Sasha, Joanna, and Stephen, for being here today. Thank you.